Now joining me on the broadcast is Ambassador Veena Sikri, former Indian diplomat. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us here on News9. Now, Ambassador, a lot of things to decode and break down for our viewers here. But first, let's begin with the outcome. Now, nobody expected that the war will end with one meeting, but something concrete was expected. You know, maybe a pause, maybe a framework for Ukraine to be brought into the negotiation. But nothing of that sort happened. What's your reading of this meeting?
Well, yes, yesterday, before the meeting started, before President Putin landed in Anchorage, it did look that a ceasefire was the maximum that you could expect from this meeting. And it did seem that President Trump was going to push for a ceasefire, a cessation of hostilities. You know, it would stop the killing, it would stop the destruction. And then both sides, maybe with President Zelensky as well, could sit down and see what's to be done. But this ceasefire has not come about. And while some may say that this means that the summit was unsuccessful, I would not call it unsuccessful, because judging from President Trump's remarks, he has said that there is definite progress. So maybe the outlines of a ceasefire, the conditionalities for a ceasefire, are what is going to be discussed. And it is important that President Trump and President Putin meeting in Anchorage after 6 years. You know, it's a very long time, and it's significant that they could meet again and establish their personal chemistry on how one can take this forward. So I think the fact that the door has been left open, President Putin's statement said next time in Moscow at the end of his statement. So he's looking at another meeting in Moscow. I think that the conditionalities for a ceasefire would include the question of commitment on Ukraine not joining NATO, and of course the question of territories, and whether there's going to be a swap of territories, or whether President Putin is insisting on keeping all these territories, all these, including Donetsk and Luhansk and Zaporizhia and Kherson. This is, I think, the main issue of contention that must be discussed now. But I think that the real outcome of the summit, we will know after President Trump has spoken to his colleagues in Europe and to President Zelensky of Ukraine. And if there is a possibility of carrying forward the discussions to outline a ceasefire, then we will know after President Trump has spoken to the European leaders and to President Zelensky.
Right, Ambassador. As you mentioned that both the leaders did say that they've made some progress. However, they did not give us details of the points that they've agreed upon and also the disagreements that still remain. But you briefly mentioned about the kind of points that could have been stalling a deal here. Let's get into the details of those disagreements that you think, could have been stalling the ceasefire deal here.
Well, of course, from President Zelensky's side, we know that he is absolutely adamant that no Ukrainian territory will be given up. And of course, he has been talking to his European colleagues on that, and he's been backed by them, by the Prime Minister of the UK, and by the EU president, and so on. So this is a very important point. But right from the outset, we do know that Russia's red line is that Ukraine will stay away from NATO. Ukraine will not draw anywhere into NATO's orbit. And this has been a red line right from the beginning, because we do know that right from the fall of the Berlin Wall, the understanding that NATO would not move anywhere towards East Europe, towards Russia, was a red line right from those days. But of course, we know that this has been observed only in the breach by West Europe and USA. So this is a big issue about the question of whether NATO is going to move into Ukrainian territory by allowing Ukraine some kind of a role in NATO. That's number one. Second, of course, is the question of territory. And we do know, for example, that way back in 2022, even within a month, within a few weeks of the fighting started, there was a very good prospect of a ceasefire, even at that time. And these talks were being held in Turkey and Anatolia under, President Erdogan's auspice. His invitation. So, but that ceasefire did not take place because the Western countries told President Zelensky, don't accept a ceasefire, we'll get you much more. And of course, from then to now, we know that Russia has been able to establish its control over a large portion of East Ukrainian territory, east of the Dnepr River, where the population is largely Russian-speaking, and where this population was promised more cultural freedom and autonomy in 2014, but those accords, the Minsk Accords and so on, were not followed at all. So I think this question of the territory which is under Russian control, which Russia has already constitutionally absorbed into its own territory, this is a very big issue, a very big stalling point. Now, whether Russia is insisting on keeping all these four regions, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, or whether they are going to negotiate and give up one or two of them. This is a question that I think will have to come out of the negotiations. But I think that President Trump, right from the very beginning, has been telling President Zelensky that he would have to accommodate on territory. Now, whereas, of course, President Zelensky thinks he has the support of the European leaders on not giving up any territory. So I think here it is a question of President Trump talking to the European leaders and convincing them about the possibility of a ceasefire and the end to this devastating destruction and killing in this conflict. So I think that this is the crucial point, that President Trump is going to talk to his European colleagues, and this is what we will know maybe by the end of today or tomorrow or by Monday, and then we can see whether indeed a next meeting in Moscow or anywhere else is likely to be on the cards.
Right, we'll have to see how that conversation between Donald Trump and his European counterparts pans out, because as you mentioned, that Trump has been claiming that Ukraine will have to make some concessions when it comes to territory. Now, Ambassador, I have to ask you this, what is in it for India? Because earlier Donald Trump had warned of additional tariffs if these talks fail. So now, given the outcome here, how do you think this is going to impact New Delhi?
Well, I think that I hope very sincerely that the talk that was earlier brought in by one of President Trump's senior cabinet members, that, if the talks don't go well, then India will have to face additional tariffs. I hope that is absolutely, under the carpet and not at all on the cards, because it was even at that time, our government had completely called it out and said that, look, India, yes, we do buy oil from Russia because it's in the interest of our people to have energy at affordable prices. But there are other countries. China is the largest purchaser of oil from Russia, and China has been given a second 90-day pass on the tariffs. And Europe itself is continuing to buy gas and oil from Russia. And we know that USA itself is continuing to trade with Russia. In fact, it's very interesting that President Trump actually mentioned that trade between Russia and USA is going up, and we do know that this trade is fairly substantial. It's not negligible at all. Several billion dollars. And it includes fertilizers, uranium, palladium, titanium, and all such products. So in the face of all of that, I think that, any talk of some additional tariffs on India would absolutely not be acceptable to India. We are hoping that when the US trade team comes to India about 10 days from now, or less than 10 days from now, that there will be some progress in the bilateral trade agreement, and we will be able to, do away with this question of tariffs.